All right, there's our reference photo. If you want to take a quick screenshot, you can see my silhouette, hi, in the background. Anyway, I'm going to put the camera on pause, get it up in a tripod, and then we'll start painting. Okay, this is the prompt for today. I think today is the 18th, right? Oh no, it's the 19th. Okay, I'm still getting caught up. This is July 18th prompt for World Watercolor Month for 2025. And the prompt is rigid. So we are making a painting of these really cool rock formations. This was a picture that I took at Starved Rock State Park in Illinois, which has some really fantastic rock formations with all these cliffs. And so I love this picture because it's got like that arched rock, which is of course very, very rigid. Now we are really going to simplify this. Otherwise, this is the kind of painting that you can get lost in the details, and we're going to keep it really loose. So it's going to be a really loose and fun watercolor painting. I'm going to start with, and it's going to be a super simple sketch. Now, in order to give myself some landmarks, I'm going to mark at about the halfway point of my paper on my tape. And then up here, I'm going to divide this in half and then in half again. And I'm going to make another mark because that's about where my arch comes down to. So then I'm going to take this halfway mark. That is where the arch comes down to from the back side. But we have this front side too, and it goes up just a little. So I'm going to take my halfway mark and I'm just going to come up about, I don't know, half an inch, maybe a little more than that. The paper that I'm using right now is approximately 5x7, roughly. It's a little taller than that, a little narrower, but roughly. Okay, so now I can just take my pencil where this starts, and I'm just going to kind of go, and it's got kind of a gentle sweeping arch. I'm not going to make it perfect. It's got a little bit of jaggedness. And then you can see I'm going to take this halfway mark. I'm going to go down just a little bit and over. This is about where that arch starts from here. And it's like two layers, right? So we've got this kind of layer that comes like this. And I can see it kind of jags down this way. Again, the nice thing about this kind of painting, and then it kind of comes back here, is that we don't have to be exact because this is something that's in nature and it is imperfect and nobody's going to know if our perspective is slightly off. So I think these paintings sometimes are very relaxing to paint. Okay, I'm just going to come up this way. Actually, I can see from my sketch, it's a little off from the actual photo, but again, we're going to just leave it. Okay, so now this is probably going to be the trickiest part, right? This arch is kind of coming, there's like a column or a big cliff of rock that's coming down like this. And there's rock in the background that we see, but it's all one sort of, there's like kind of a cavernly, like deep crevice that's right here. So I'm just going to kind of sketch that in, and it kind of comes in this like funky Y shape. So I'm going to sketch that in. Okay, and that crevice comes around. I'm going to move it out a little bit like this. It doesn't come exactly like that, but that's close enough. And then it continues on in the background. Like here it is, right? And then we've got rock that you see more like this. And it kind of carries around this way. So I'm going to kind of carry it that way. And then underneath of that is another kind of crevice. And you can kind of see it's here. And so I'm going to come down here. And then it follows along like this. So this part is, this part, if you can imagine, it's sticking out. And I'm going to make it a little more like that here. So it's sticking out here. And then it's recessed there. So this part is in shadow because this part is sticking out. That makes sense, right? Same thing, like this is in shadow because it's recessed in, and this part is kind of sticking out. All right, so then I'm going to carry that along here as well, but this is in the background, so it kind of jumps back a little bit. There we go. Okay, and then up on this side, this is like a more yellowy kind of sandstone-y formation. I can see that this sticks out here, and we've got like a nice big, it's kind of lumpy here, right? And then kind of about in this, about where the arch kind of comes down here, this tends to come in there, and there's kind of a deep crevice there. So I'm going to draw that in. These are just giving me some landmarks. We're not going to follow this exactly. There's some greenery in here. We're actually going to leave that out because I think that's just going to overcomplicate things. What's interesting is like this comes down and around. So you can see how this, and it kind of, the formation kind of comes in like this. So I know I'm saying a lot of this and that because it's hard to describe how you're sketching out lines. The best thing to do is just kind of take a look at what my drawing looks like and follow along. Okay, and then this little piece here kind of comes out. So again, we've got this crevice. And my pencil's pretty dark here, and I'm going to just leave it that way because I want to be able to really see what's dark. And I'm going to paint over that pencil. That's gonna be a little muddy looking, but I'm okay with that. Same thing here. Okay, so my pencil is gonna be definitely part of, although this kind of flattens out. That's what's interesting about this. So kind of, we've got like this deep crevice here, but then it kind of comes like that. All right, I'm gonna leave it like that. In the background, right about, we've got this like deep crevice here, right about down there is another one that's back here. I'm going to just kind of add that in. And then there's some interesting kind of like, it kind of is a little jagged here and comes forward. So we kind of see that. And then there's kind of like some cracks here. All right. I think, and then up here, we have another, like where this is kind of coming in and out here. There's like another kind of ledgy. This is all carved away by a river. I don't know how many millions of years ago, and so you can kind of see there's like this is like underneath, this ledge sticks out. And so this will make more sense when we actually paint it in. And then we've got some kind of, I don't know if this is sandstone or not, but it kind of reminds me of that because it's got like these like lighter, yeah. And then there's like right here, these kind of swoop in this way, which is kind of interesting. The way that the rock sort of shifts. It's got almost like a, there. Okay, I'm going to leave that. I'm sorry that there weren't better directions. It's a lot of this and that. We're just going to kind of go with that. Right here where the base of this kind of pillar of rock, comes right here and it sort of smooths out like this. Right, and so I'm gonna make that line a little stronger than it is in the actual picture because I think it'll make a little more sense when we paint it if we kind of go like that. Okay. If you want to take a screenshot of this and just use what I've done, you are welcome to do that as always. You can also go ahead and sketch it out if you want to. Your sketch might look a bit different than mine, and that is perfectly fine. This has some crevices in here too. All right, I'm going to stop messing with this, and then there's a crevice here. This is very sketchy. This is more sketchy on watercolor paper than I usually go. But I think that it's actually going to be an advantage to have some of this darker pencil to help us develop where those crevices are. This is a kind of painting that can be really fun. It's really easy. There's a lot of like washes. We're just going to tip a bunch of different color in here and then go over and create some details. This is going to be 3 basic washes. We're going to paint this in a really traditional way, which is we're going to start with the lightest wash, and then we're going to add our mid value, and then we're going to go back in with a detail brush and add our darkest tones. Without further ado, let's start painting. Hopefully you had a time to screenshot that. Now I have a dirty palette right here. I'm going to leave it dirty. This is a kind of painting I love to have all of these colors. We're using a lot of natural colors, so we're going to mix in, and that's okay. All right, I'm going to start off with my size 14 round, and I'm just going to fill that up with water. Oh, I think I want to move, sorry, I'm moving my water this way. Why? Because that way I'm not swishing my arm over the top of where I'm painting. Nobody needs to see that jiggle, right? Okay, we're going to start with doing a nice big pile of, here, I'm going to move my palette this way. Okay, we're going to start with a good pile of burnt sienna. If you've painted with me, you realize now that I use burnt sienna and raw sienna and French ultramarine in almost all of my paintings. I don't think I could have a watercolor palette without those 3 colors. So I'm going to make one pile of that, one pile of my raw sienna over here. And I know there's some like blue underneath of there. It's okay if it gets mixed in because we're going to really mute these all out anyway. Okay, I've got a nice big pile of that. I want to add a little more water. And then up over here, we're going to, of course, add my favorite French ultramarine. And it's just going to go right in there. Now this raw sienna is a fairly, like it washes out pretty easily, which is what makes it work so well for this. But I end up having to pull quite a bit of pigment out. And it might be that this paint doesn't, this is a Rembrandt. I should probably one day, I really love the tone of it, so I stick with it, but I don't know that it is the best for re-wetting. So some paints do a better job of re-wetting when you dry them down in a palette than others. And we are definitely going to use, okay, the other color I'm going to pull is my Green Apatite Genuine, which is very granulating. So like some of these colors, the Green Apatite Genuine and the French Ultramarine, when we say that a paint color is granulating, it means that the pigments settle into the texture of the paper. And the paper that I'm going to use for this is a rough. So it's a rough texture. It is 100% cotton. Am I going to lighten up some of the, I'm not going to lighten up the lines. I usually lighten up the lines. Okay, so we're going to start with, and the other thing, oh, I think I'm going to pull out some quinacridone rose. Okay, this is going to be our limited palette. We're going to use these 5 colors through the whole painting. Everything is going to be made with these 5. And when we do this first lightest wash, this is where I tend to pull out the most pure pigments. There's some pinkish up in here and some blue. So we're going to get a nice, I'm going to start off, oops. I had some pigment in there I wasn't planning on. I'm going to start off by just doing some clear water here. My water's not clear. I wanted to start off by doing some clear water here, but I didn't have my brush washed off. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is, it's got some really cool like kind of stripy striations of color. And so I'm just going to put some of that in. And I'm going to pull in, there's like some pink undertones. So we're going to pull that in. And we've got these kind of brown undertones. And I'm just kind of filling in and letting stuff bleed together, but also let some of that color really, I'm going to use a little bit. I'm going to kind of just pull from all of my colors here that I have on my palette. I'm going to add a little bit of the green. I can see that, or I'm sorry, blue, but I can see that there's some green up in this far corner here. You can kind of see like some funky green right there. And then we go back to like a blue. I'm going to let them kind of mix and muddle up. And we're going to go like this. Okay. So then there is, I'm going to reach across for some paper towel. There are some spots where it's like a little bit whiter, and that's here. So I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm going to just kind of whiten that up a little bit here. There's a spot here that's really light. So I'm just there again, paper towel, and there's a spot here that's really light. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing for here, but my brush strokes are going to match this, the fact that this is curving in. So let's go ahead and start with some clear water. This time it's going to be actually clear. And these are going to meld in together. They're going to, because we're going to touch here, I'm going to get some blending, and that's okay. These are the lightest colors. This is all, this underneath side is all going to get darkened up without using this wet on wet technique, where they don't blend together as much. Okay, so I've got a lot of kind of pink in here. So I'm just going to kind of follow that along here. I'm just kind of pushing, and I'm using, okay, I'm accentuating the fact that we've got a flat surface that's here, and then we've got this angle, because this is sort of the underside, right? We've got this kind of cool perspective. I've got a lot of this warm bluey yellow coming in here, so I'm just going to drop that in. I'm going to pick up, as I get to the farther recessed parts, it's going to be more blue, because it's colder, and it's in more shadow, although there is like a little highlight here, which is kind of cool, so let's push that in. And then down here, it's like warm, and there's some warm stripes, but it's also pretty dark. Okay. And then I'm going to come in, and I'm just going to do a little bit of just like kind of tipping in some of this neutral color, right? And this is bleeding out. I don't care. That's fine. We can just pick it up if we need to. Yeah. We're going to kind of swipe that like that. Okay, now up in this area, like right up in here, it's a little more blue again. So we're just going to kind of hit it with a little bit of blue. And it kind of comes from the back forward. So I'm just going to kind of make these lines, and I'm just barely tipping my brush, and my paper's already wet. So I'm barely tipping my brush in. This looks pretty colorful, and that is good. Okay, I can see that some of my like lighter color has bled back. See how I've got all this paint in here, so it's bled back in. I'm just going to go back in with my paper towel and lighten up some of those spots on that edge there. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. It's very rainbowy and stripy, but it won't be that way when we are done. Also remember that watercolor dries lighter than what you're seeing now. Okay, so now I'm going to carry down, it's more green yellow back here. There's more pinks and blues here. So I'm going to focus on using this warmer raw sienna here. And that's going to just kind of come in. I'm going to cover this whole area in that. Oh, you know what I missed is that little space. Okay, that's okay. And I'm just filling in that area, right? And I'm going right over my pencil, and I'm coming in with some green. There's a lot of green back in here. So I'm just going to bring in my green Apatite Genuine, and I'm just kind of swooping in, especially where it's got that where my darker pencil lines are. But I'm just kind of it's a little stripy. I'm just kind of tipping that color in there, letting everything flow together. And then up at the top part, it gets a little bit more warm, reddy pink. So when I get up here, I'm just going to kind of, in those shadowy parts, I'm going to do the same thing where we're just kind of pulling in, just tipping in. So when I say tipping in, I have very little water in my brush. I've wiped off almost all of the water once I have my first layer down, and I'm just picking up a bit of color, and I'm just tapping, tap, tap, tap. And you have to have no water in your brush when you do this, or very little, because if you have a lot of water in your brush and you go to tap, it's going to bloom out, and you're going to get these funky water blooms, which can be really fun, but in this particular case, that's not what we're looking for. Okay, so this side is the softest, most yellowy. So I'm going to go back in and pull up some more of this raw sienna. I'm going to make a little pile off to the side, and I'm going to use this alone. What I'm doing is I'm creating some depth and dimension with my hue. So it's warmest where it's lightest in color with the least amount of blue, and the more we get to the shadowed part, because this is more shadowed closer to us, which is kind of unusual for picture, but that's how the lighting source is working here. So this is got a lot more blue to it because it's just shadowy. And so that is a nice trick we can use. Oop, this is pretty okay, I'm just going to kind of roughly push this across the page. And I need a little more water. Not much, but a little more, because see how I'm kind of dry. Sometimes dry brushing is really fun, and this rough texture picks that up better. And then this is kind of that same neutral color, right? So I'm going to just take that all the way down. Now I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to tip in some of this raw sienna. And again, I have very little water in my brush at this point. I'm just adding little bits of color. This part is in shadow, if you remember. So we're going to just shadow that out a little bit. Right now, we're not worrying about, and I'm going to just kind of add in some, we're going to add more detail when we do our darker stage for these, rocky, rough surface. It's got a lot of kind of lines. I always want to use the word striation, but I don't think that's quite right. This is kind of got like a darker red stripe in the actual rock surface. It's more yellowy here, so we're going to leave that. And same thing down here. This has got like some more red to it. There's a little bit of red in here. I'm just using the reference photo to kind of figure that out. Okay, I'm going to leave that. Now I left this little spot. I need to go back in and take care of that, which is going to be a mixture of kind of a blue-green color. It's a little bit grayed out because this is really in the shadow. So I'm just going to tuck that in there. All right, now what we need to do is let this really dry. This is our first layer. This is super colorful, and if yours is really colorful, that's great. That's what we want. I think this is going to be so interesting and cool. I'm super excited about this picture. So, it's easy to, okay, here's the thing. I'm looking and I'm going, oh, I could add some green in here. That would be really cool. But we're not super wet anymore. It's starting to dry. And if I start dropping some color in here right now, I might really mess it up. So when you're painting like this, sometimes, even if it's not perfect, even if you go back and you're like, ooh, I really wish I had done that, do it on the next layer. Because if I've got this weird spot right now where the paper's wet, but it's not really wet, the paint has started to dry, it's going to do some really funky things if I start like messing with it. So I'm going to leave it alone. We're going to let it dry. We're going to come back after it's all the way dry. So this is going to be maybe 30 or 40 minutes. You want to put your video on pause. The other thing you can do is use a little heat gun dryer. I have one here. So you can dry up with a hair dryer or a heat gun. If you do choose to go this route, just know that the paint colors can fade a little bit when you use a heat. And sometimes it does some funky things to the paper at the end. It sometimes doesn't lay quite as flat, but it is a way to like hurry up if you're just feeling impatient. I use these a lot when I'm doing my sketches. I don't use them as much on final paintings. Okay, so I will see you in a little bit after this is all the way dry. Okay, make sure your paper is all the way dry. Mine is bone dry, and that's what we want because we're going to do our next layer. When you paint in this way, these additional layers are called glazing layers because we're going to glaze over the top of what we already painted. These colors are going to affect that. They're going to kind of pop through. So we've created this sort of base layer of color, and now we're going to develop the midtones, and then at the end, we're going to work on our darkest values, what's in really deep shadow. Now, when you paint this way, this is how you can get a lot of dimension into your landscape paintings. And one trick I have is that I use my biggest brush when I do my lightest washes because I don't want to get focused on the details in that layer. In that layer, I'm only looking at the general color and temperature. And so in this painting, our temperature is that this is the warmest. Our sun is kind of coming in this direction. And so even though this is farther away, it has the most light hitting it. This is kind of our mid-tone area. This is light. This is mid-tone, and then these are our deepest. This is kind of mid-tone, and then this is the deepest area. And so we're painting this in a way that we're really developing that. There's a lot of interest in the way that this photograph is lit up. And then one of the things that can make we've limited our palette, so we are only using 5 colors throughout the entire painting from start to finish so that things do not feel disjointed. And we're going to create a lot of depth by really, really getting deep colors. It's going to feel too dark when we lay it on, but that's okay. So that we have that like really high contrast between those lightest tones and the deepest tones. And so again, the trick that I use is for that first light wash, I use my biggest brush because I'm just focusing on overall color temperature. And then I'm going to move for the midtones to a sort of medium brush. I'm going to use my size 6. And then when we go to those darkest tones, I'm going to move to my the smallest brush that I'm going to use in this painting, which is a size 4. You could go smaller than that. These brushes tip out to a really fine point, so I can get away with a size 4, but you might even go down to like a size 2 or 3 brush, depending on which brush you're using. Okay, and so the other thing that I love about this is that we're using the temperature of the color. So let's look at the color wheel. Let me grab it. When we look at the color wheel, if you don't have a color wheel, definitely invest in one because they are so helpful. Okay, so if you look here, we're going to divide it in half. Anything on this side of the color wheel is considered warm, and then anything on this side of the color wheel is considered cool. And you can kind of hold it this way if you want to, so cool, warm, but generally speaking, your blues and greens are considered your cool colors, and your reds and oranges are considered, and yellows are considered your warm color. And this can go either way, because with a teeny bit of blue, we're pushing it to green, it becomes cool. With a teeny bit of red, we're pushing it to this way, and it becomes warm. And same thing for purple. Because you add a little bit of blue, it pushes towards blue or it pushes towards red. So it can shift warm or cool depending on if you're using more red or more blue. Okay, and then in this painting, even though generally speaking, in most landscapes, but not always, the coolest colors are the farthest away. It creates like this sense of depth because you have like these blue grays way off in the distance and things get warmer as it comes closer to you. But because we have some unusual lighting in this particular painting, that is not the case. So this is the darker, more shadowed areas, and so they're actually cooler. And as we go a little farther away, and there isn't a lot of distance here, but we go a little farther away and it gets lighter, and that's because we've got some unusual lighting. So I think that makes it kind of fun. All right, so without further ado, let's start painting. We are going to leave our highlighted areas alone. We're going to be done painting on them. So right now, take a good look at your photo and think about what is my medium or dark values, because that's where we're going to paint. And we're going to paint on top of, like, as we get darker, we can paint our dark values with our midtones as well. And so I can see like this is darker and this is darker and some of this is a little darker, right? But this we're going to leave alone. Oh, and this is like a ledge. So you can see that like this is the underneath part of something that sticks out. So this is going to stay light, but this is going to get darker. So basically this space here is what we're going to paint in with darker colors. But we're going to do the same thing we did before, where we're kind of altering between that blue and that brown and the green, because I think that's where we're really going to focus. We're not going to use so much pink anymore. That was really just in our highlights. All right, so let's go ahead and mix up some color. I'm going to pull out of my French ultramarine to make a nice pile of that. It's fairly intense here. We're definitely gonna mute that down. And then I'm gonna pull out my green Apatite Genuine. And I'm not gonna use this lighter raw sienna. I think I'm probably gonna be done with that. And then let's pull in a pile of our burnt sienna. There we go. Just there. Okay, and now we're gonna start here, which has a lot of blue undertones. So I'm gonna use mostly blue, but I'm gonna kind of pull them together. See? Because when I pull them together, I'm getting these neutral colors. Right, I've got these neutral colors that are blending together. I'm going to pull from those. And what we're going to have to make sure when we glaze, if you have a lot of water in your brush and you go into this painting with that, you can disturb the underlayer. And we don't want to do that. We want to leave what we painted already as our first wash. We want to leave that intact. So we're going to have to be a little bit careful about how we pull that in, right? And we're gonna have to be a little bit careful about, I'm sorry, I'm just messing with my color, about not getting too much water on our brush. And you can control that a bit with paper towel. So I use a little sponge next to my water jar. And what I do is after I dip it in the water, if I don't want a brush that's too wet, I kind of tap it on the edge of the jar. And then I just drag it across this sponge. And that pulls a lot of water out. You could also drag it across a paper towel. We need enough water to make the paint flow, right? But not so much water that we're going to disturb the underlayer. So that's the tricky part of this painting. Okay, now I'm going to start with the bluish area because that's really where we're at with this. And we're just going to come in and I'm going to very lightly glaze. Okay, so you can see how I need just a touch more water because see how it's dancing around and I want to fill in. And I'm just going to come down right over the top of everything that I already have here. And you see we still get some of those undercolors that we initially laid down. I'm going to kind of pull in my two together here. And I'm going to come along here. It's a little darker here. Actually, and then there's a little bit because of where the light source is, it's a little light right here. So I'm just going to add a little bit of that brown. Okay, and now I'm going to come back in with a much, well, not too dark though, because remember we're working on, I have to remind myself, I'm working on those midtones. And so I'm going to come in here and it's going to kind of do the same thing where it's gray. And then these rocks are, I'm going to kind of stripe this in a bit. Now I'm gonna move in some of my green paint here on my palette to get it a bit of a green undertone. And now I'm not going to paint this with all the way in shadow. I'm not going to do that with this because some of it's in shadow and some of it's highlighted. So I'm going to go along my original pencil marks and I'm just kind of going to bring in, I'm going to start where that pencil is and then I'm going to go upward and just kind of drag it out a little bit. And I'm going to do that here, and that's creating my midtones. And I'm going to kind of dance my brush. I'm going to make sure that they're not perfectly even lines. I'm going to kind of come up in here, do the same thing, right? Because this is a little, you can come in with your paper towel if you get, like, if you want to, you can soften edges with paper towel. And that, if I use water to soften my edge, it's going to be these are rocks. It's rigid. The lines are a little harder. So sometimes when we soften edges by bringing some just plain water and then brushing it out. We're going to leave things a little harsher here and because it's rock. And so I'm going to use a little bit of paper towel to soften up without losing those lines. Okay, so now this gets nice and dark because it kind of runs in from one thing to the other and it's in this green, but I'm going to add just a little bit of blue. Okay, and this is still my mid-tone values. I'm going to just hit that with my paper towel a little bit. And then this kind of comes down, same thing. And I'm just going to follow these lines. Do you see how, oh, this is just developing so nicely. I don't have a lot of water in my brush and it's getting a little kind of dry brushy. It's leaving more texture, that's okay. And then this is mostly, I'm going to add some more blue to this because I'm looking in the picture. This is actually this is very shadowed and we're going to develop that to be a little bit darker later. But for right now, because we're painting our midtones, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to hit my darkest stuff yet. And I'm just going to kind of go like that. Now, there's kind of a shadow and it's kind of like a greeny blue. I'm going to leave my brush really dry. So I'm dipping it in the water to clean off the old paint. Now my brush is pretty dry and I'm going to take it on its side and I'm just going to kind of dry brush in these shadows. And you can see how I'm scrubbing, I'm holding my brush with my hand and I'm scrubbing in this way that lets the surface of the paper that's raised up catches the paint, but it doesn't fill it in smoothly. It fills it in a rough way. Okay, now I'm going to move to this next section right here. And this has more more kind of warm, like warm grays, right? There's more brown undertones because we're going to that lighter space. We're going to use a whole lot. We have more midtones here than we do here. We're going to use not very much paint in this section. So this part is dark, which is this kind of underneath, right? So there's this little spot right there. I'm going to kind of accentuate that. Okay. And now the rest of it is going to be fairly light. I'm going to make sure I don't have too much paint on my brush, and we're just going to kind of like, there's some it's very stripy, so we're just going to kind of keep it like that, right? And it's just going to be a little bit, there's a little bit of darkness here, like there's some, like almost like, it looks like doesn't it look like it was sawed off or something? It's so cool. And then there's just a little bit here. This is where our pencil lines, I'm just really following those pencil lines we had. And as it's warmer up here and as it moves down, it gets a little cooler. So I'm going to pull a little bit of my blue out. It's a little more shaded here. So we're going to come in here and I'm just going to like little bits of streakiness. This is where right? Just to really give it that rocky texture. And you can just see that there's all these layers that was carved away by, this was in an area with a riverbed, and so it was just carved away by the river, which to me is so cool. Now I'm gonna kind of come around like this, there. Okay, oh my gosh, we're getting so close. Do you see how we're starting to develop like lighter, mid-tone, and highlighted areas? It's a little blendy still. When we go in and add our darkest tones, then we're really going to accentuate that. We're going to let this dry. If this is feeling a little too stripy and colorful for you, I like that this is pretty colorful, so I'm going to leave mine alone. But if you feel like if maybe yours was a little brighter, you can take the softest gray here. I'm just going to do this up in this corner, and you can just kind of hit that softer gray over the top of this to tone it down a bit. And as I do that, I'm kind of dry brushing over this because I don't want to, I'm going to add a little water. There we go. And I'm just going to kind of brush that out so that, there we go. So this is a way that you kind of darken that up a little. But I really like how it's, because in the photo, it's kind of stripy and there's all these other colors that are cool. There's like some line work that we could use to make it a bit more detailed, and we might at the end. I'm not sure, we'll have to think about it. Anyway, okay, so we're gonna let this dry all the way, and then we're gonna go in with our darkest tones, and that's gonna make this really come alive. But we need to let it dry all the way. So I will see you back here in about 30 minutes, or you can use a dryer to make yours dry if you wanna go a little faster. All right, so this is the time to hit pause, and I'll see you in a bit. All right, here we go. This is the part that's going to feel a little bit scary because we are going to go really dark with this next layer in order to develop a lot of dimension. And so it's going to feel like, oh my gosh, this seems so dark. That's okay. That's part of what gives things a lot of depth. We're going to create a lot of like these deep dark crevices. In order to do that, I'm going to mix up we're going to kind of, like, we started with 5 colors and then we used 4 colors, and now we're going to go down to 3 colors. We might use the help of our Payne's Gray to get this super deep, and we'll see if we need it. Sometimes it's kind of a cheater way to get super dark, but we don't want to just go in with black, or that would be really uninteresting. All right. I'm going to pull up, so I'm pulling up my French Ultramarine, some fairly thick mix, right, of and then my genuine Green Apatite, and then the other one that I'm going to pull in a really dark, intense mix of is my Burnt Sienna. Although I've got a lot of water on my palette, so it's still from before. If I put my Burnt Sienna in that right now, it's going to spread out and not be intense. So I'm going to just clean this up a little bit. There. I want my palette itself to be fairly dry because I don't want, if I have a bunch of water on it and then I bring this intense version in, then it's going to just kind of dilute it, and I don't want it to be really diluted. I'm having trouble pulling up at my paint because they've dried, so if you need to just hit them with a little spritz to make them easier to pull out, go ahead and do that. All right, there we go. Oh, that's much better. Okay, now these seem so bright, right? We're gonna add, I think, to make this easier, we're gonna add just a touch of, we can use this dark blue to this French Ultramarine, and like we can make a really dark mix here using just these 2 colors. I'm going to show you in between. We can make an almost black, right? There we go. They mix up to make a lovely dark gray, and then we can pull in some of this genuine Green Apatite, right? There we go. So this is how we're going to get our darkest tones, by using these together. If you need a little help, you can pull in some Payne's Gray, or I wouldn't use Lamp Black, I don't think, but you could use a little bit of Payne's Gray. Jane's Gray is a one if you're using some Daniel Smith colors, is another good option. And that'll kind of add some depth to here too. If you are not getting, if you're not getting really dark, just from mixing your French Ultramarine and your Burnt Sienna. And this is where watercolor quality is going to make a difference. So if you're using a less expensive set, and there's nothing wrong with using a less expensive set, but if you are, sometimes that pigment strength isn't strong enough to be able to create these really dark mixes. And then that's where you're going to want to pull out darker color to like a Payne's Gray to mix in and get that depth. When you use an artist grade paint, the pigment is much stronger, there's less binder and filler, and so you can do things like mix together these, these colors to get these really deep values. Okay, that was my little mixing 101. Anyway, let's get back to painting our painting. I am having trouble bringing up my reference photo. That's okay. All right. My computer's doing something weird. I'm going to put us on pause and fix that. Sorry about that. A little technical difficulty. Okay, so we are back. I had a little, my computer needed to be restarted so that I could have my reference picture. When I paint, I like to have my reference picture off to the side so that I can see it. So that's usually on my computer. All right, so back to these. We've got our beautiful colors mixed in together with all of these great deep colors. Now this is going to feel scary. It always feels scary to me. I've got a smaller brush. I'm using my size 4. And my size 4 goes to a really fine tip. And now we're just going to paint in the very deepest values. So I'm going to start, and I'm really looking at like what is super dark here. And this like little piece here that you see that kind of comes in. So I'm going to go like that. And then like this whole area is just really dark. So I'm going to bring that paint down like that. And then I'm going to rinse off my brush, get some clean water, but I'm going to really tap it off. I don't want too much, so I'm going to tap it on my paper towel here. I don't want to disturb my layers underneath, and I'm just going to pull some of that out of it. Same thing here. Just going to pull some of that out. Okay, now let's go back in. I'm going to pull a little more blue in here, a little more brown. There. Oh, look how pretty that is. Okay. This is really blue. So another part that's really dark. And if you're not sure what the darkest parts of your reference photo are, you can turn them into a black and white photo, and then you can just look at what is the darkest values. So they're here, and it kind of comes up like this, right? And so I'm just dancing my brush around. I'm doing some dry brushing to get a little texture, and now I'm going to rinse my brush, get some water in there, and I'm just going to pull this out a little bit. And I'm going to use a little bit of this like warm gray brown. So I'm kind of glazing over some of these midtones too. And because this is just really dark here. All right. I'm going to go back to this really dark color. Okay, I'm adding, and you'll see what I do off camera. You can't see that on camera because if I zoom back and you see both sides of my palette, then you don't see much of the painting. So I'm just messing with my burnt sienna and my blue to get just the right tone. And I just kind of dip in one and the other and I'm mixing until I get it just right. I like that. I want this to be on the bluer side because this is the deepest, darkest part of the picture is kind of right here. So I'm just going to kind of bring that in some more. All right. And then... and it kind of comes around all the way to this edge. It really is super dark here. And it always feels like, to me, now I'm going to add a little water, just clean water. And I'm going to kind of pull this out. I'm going to load up my brush with just a little bit of this like lighter medium part. And I'm just going to kind of darken this up a little. I want to leave that edge a little. Okay, and then it gets darker up in this corner as well. Right up in here. So we're going to add some more. These are like the darkest parts, right, of the painting. So we're going to go like that. I think I want to add a bit more here. Again, sometimes it's hard to go as dark as you need to because you're feeling like, oh my gosh, that's so dark. But it is dark. You just have to be like, really look at that painting and see how dark it is. And I'm leaving this a little rough and a little scuffed up because this is rock. And I want it to feel textury and kind of dark. And I can see that we've got kind of like it kind of comes like this actually. Yeah, there. And I'm just going to pump that a little bit with a paper towel. It's got a little darker than I wanted it to. It got a little darker than I wanted it to. Okay, so now, again, we're really, really dark in here, but it's a little more green. So a little more green-blue. So I'm going to pull a bit of green down into my mix and a little bit of blue. And we're going to get this, I need to make sure it's really dark. There we go. Kind of in the middle to gray it out with a little bit of that burnt sienna. All right, and then this is in here. This is almost black, right? I know this feels so dark, but it is what it is. And my brush is a little on the drier side. And I'm going to kind of stripe it through. And because dry brushing means that your brush is a bit drier and you're allowing the texture of the paper to show through. And then other parts, I add a little more water on my brush and I kind of brush it out. So like right here, that's what's going to happen because it's going to kind of brush out. This is super dark. I'm going to pull in some of my blue again. So I'm really just dancing around between the blue, the brown, and the green. And I'm using my photograph, the reference picture, to decide which pair, if I'm heading towards blue, I'm heading towards green, or I'm heading towards brown. All right, so this is like, there's a lot of blue in this part. There we go. All right, and that's back in here. And this feels so dark. It feels like you're gonna wreck your painting because it feels like you're making it very like almost too dark. But the truth is that look at how all of a sudden, when you add those dark tones, you see all of a sudden you get all of this depth. It's just so amazing to me. And so we're gonna paint over, and I'm using kind of a combination of, it's a little dry brushy, right? Because I'm letting the texture of the paper come through. I don't have so much water on my brush that it is flooding in. Instead, we're seeing a lot of that texture. And I'm kind of going back and forth between using the tip of the brush to get these finer lines. We're just gonna kind of add that in. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Okay, and even darker there. And then I'm using the side of my brush to kind of pull across. So I'm using kind of a combination of things, right? Where I want to. Okay, so do you see how all of a sudden there's so much depth here? Before it seemed a little flat. Now there's like, you can really see those highlights and shadows and the definition. This wall just sort of comes alive. And so that's where it's really easy to not want to go dark enough because you think you're going to wreck it. But actually, in the end, your painting looks very flat. You have to use these nice deep colors at the end to really give it definition and give it life. Okay, now I'm mixing in a bit more green, and I'm gonna come in. I probably need it to be a bit darker. So I'm gonna add some blue, I'm gonna add some green apatite genuine. Ooh, yeah, perfect. And a little tiny bit of that burnt sienna. I'm using all three colors every time. It's just a matter of whether I'm tilting it one way or the other. Okay, so now this right here, as it gets here, it just gets a little more green. So I'm gonna just kind of pull in some more green. And I'm kind of, again, dry brushing, and I'm going to use my tip to add some like just very light, the lightest ever little brush marks, right? Just like kind of like a little stripiness, because that's what it has. Now, when I come up here, there's like this really deep crevice. It's so deep, and it has blue undertones. Sometimes when things are like their very darkest or deepest, blue helps to make it look farther away or deeper. So I'm going to pull some more blue into this, but not too much. Okay, and we're gonna paint right in here because this is super dark, and so is this underneath of here. So we're just adding some depth to that. I'm actually going to come into here too because this is really dark. All right, and then this starts to lighten up a bit. So these crevices are not as dark. I'm going to add a bit more of my burnt sienna here to warm it up a bit. And it's kind of in between. It's not really the deepest tones, but it's a little darker than the midtones. We're just going to kind of like, yeah. And what I want to do too is, do you see how this rock face is here? There. See how sorry. It's sometimes really hard to talk and paint at the same time. I don't know if you've tried that or not, but trying to explain every step as you're doing them, it's a challenge. This has definitely challenged me doing these videos. It's almost more challenging for me to do these videos than it is for me just to paint really finished pieces. But I really liked, I've liked this. I've had a lot of fun with this. Okay. So I'm going to pull some of this out because I think what's happening is, this part is actually darker than this part. I'm reassessing as I look in the photo. I'm going to go back in and darken this later. Yeah. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this. We've got some brown or warm colors, we've got some greens, we've got some blues in there, and we've developed a lot of really great dimension. Now, when we move back here, this is the farthest away. We're going to have the least amount. It's going to be more detailed and more depth here than it is here, because otherwise these two things are going to fight each other. So when you're thinking about composition, you want your eye to move around the piece. We have to have parts that have greater contrast and less contrast. So this has less contrast, this has less contrast, but we've got this curved line, so that's going to help your eye smooth through and swoop through the painting. And then we've got a lot of contrast here. I don't want this contrast to fight with this contrast. So when I paint this, I'm going to use more burnt sienna than I am of the other tones. And I'm going to come down here at the bottom of my palette where it's a little lighter, right? And I'm just going to add some dimension. I'm going to be careful not to add too much. We've got a little bit right here, and I'm just going to kind of add some texture here. But you see how I'm going much lighter? There's a little bit here, and it kind of doubles back, like, because it like edges in. And then we're gonna, and then here is darker, and there's kind of a little bit of darkness there. There's a little bit here. I'm just dancing my brush around, and I'm using much, much less, you know, pigment and depth here. Now the exception is that this right here is nice and dark, so I'm gonna pull some more blue in, because it kind of follows around, but I'm not gonna bring it all the way out, and I'm gonna do the same thing here, because it kind of connects these two shapes, right? Even though they're like layers, they are part of the same painting. All right, and then I'm gonna get, okay, so I've pulled some of that here, but now I wanna lighten it back up again, so I'm gonna have a little more water in my brush, not a lot, but a little more than I have previously. And I'm gonna start pulling it this way a little bit, see? All right, and it's just this really soft, there. We might add a little more depth here, but not much, because we just don't wanna overdo it. And just kind of touching up. And here's the thing, you can always go back in and add more later, but I don't want to add too much. I don't want to have too much. This is like kind of a mottled effect here, so I'm going to add some of that. I'm just doing some dry brushing, modeling. It's got kind of like this. There. It's not, this is more, the color's a little more, I don't know what I'm trying to say. There's some more variation in this rock in terms of like lighter and darker. So I just wanted to add a little bit of that, and I'm going to add a little bit of that here. I'm just bouncing my brush around. Okay, now this is the exception. This is pretty dark, so I'm going to go ahead, but it is still warm. I'm going to get out some more burnt sienna, because I want to make sure that this looks like it is this like ledge, right? So we're going to kind of come in and that it is in shadow. And the most shadowed spot is right down there. So I'm going to pull up just some nice, almost straight blue gray here. That blue helps things to recede. And we're going to put that right in the corner. Okay. All right. I think this is looking really good. We've got some dimension and depth. I do feel like this and this might need to be a little bit darker, because this is light. Ooh, sorry. And so I might add kind of an overview, and I think this needs to be darker. But before we do those things, we're going to let this dry. There's a lot more detail down in here, but I'm not going to include that in our painting, because I don't think it's going to help our painting. I think it's going to add busyness that we don't want. And so we're going to simplify that area. All right, let's let this dry all the way so that we can glaze over another layer, because I think we're going to glaze over this whole area so that there is a bit more difference in value between this and this, because they're a little too close to each other. And this is more mid-tone and this is lighter. All right, I'm going to put us on pause, and I'll see you in about 20 or 30 minutes when this is dry. Okay, now we have to be really careful here. If you want to stop right now and leave your painting as it is, you can. Your values might not need to be adjusted as much as mine. I'm going to do two things. This painting's really dry. I'm going to use this. This is my favorite brush for lifting, so I'm going to use a bit of a lifting technique. So I have just water. The reason I like this brush is because it's got a really stiff, it's much stiffer than my, this is a synthetic brush, so it's stiffer than my natural hair brushes are. Also, this is a fairly inexpensive brush, and those other brushes are expensive, so I don't want to wreck them. Okay, so what I'm going to do in these lighter parts is I'm just going to go through and scrub them up, because I think this ended up a little darker than I wanted it to be, because I just don't have enough. I don't have enough. This is going to be the lightest. This is those mid-tones, and this is that darkest tone. And what has happened is these are kind of conflicting with each other. So I'm going to lighten this up by scrubbing with my brush and lifting with my paper towel. This works well if you have cotton paper. This does not work well if you have cellulose paper. So if you're working on cellulose paper, don't do this. You will be definitely disappointed. Okay, do you see how that's just lightening ever so slightly? And I'm being careful not to hit my darkest parts. I'm just really hitting the these midtones. Or not midtones, I'm sorry. The lightest parts. Because I don't want to lose my texture that I worked so hard to create. It just sometimes when you step back and you look at a painting, you realize, ooh, there's not enough contrast here. I went a little too dark. And so sometimes you can kind of fix that, and that's what I'm doing here. And you know what happens, I think a lot of tutorials, artists do that, and they do this off camera. So you don't see them make the mistake. They show you this really great painting, and they've done this off camera, and then you don't understand why your painting hasn't turned out, and theirs has. And part of it is because they're not showing you this part. So I'm going to show you my mistakes, and I'm going to show you how I fix them. Because I think that that's more valuable out of a tutorial than... and I could film this whole thing all over again, but I'm also not going to do that. So I kind of made that promise to myself. Like I was just going to get this painted and... Okay, so now this is a little lighter. Now we're going to add a little more depth to this and to this, because I feel like both of those areas need more shadow. I'm going to go back to my size 4 brush again, and I'm going to use what's on my palette, this kind of gray color, right? Just kind of in the middle here. And I'm going to ever so lightly, this is really important, there's not too much water, I'm just going to paint over the top of this, most of it. And I'm going to come where, but I'm not going to paint over, I'm going to leave some of these highlights because I don't want to lose all of those, right? But this whole section is darker. I'm going to mix a little more blue in there. This whole section is darker than what I have, what I put down for my initial mid-tone. And again, sometimes you don't see that till the end, and then you have to go back in and fix it. So that's what we're doing. There's more green to it. There's a little bit of warmth. So I'm going to grab some of that down here, right here, there. Okay, do you see how now we have a little more, this is looking lighter. By adding some depth to this, we've lightened that up, and we have more contrast. There just wasn't enough contrast there. Okay, now for this, we're going to add some more. Actually, I feel like this is blue, but it's not so blue. I've got maybe mine a little too blue. So because we're going to still see the colors underneath, I'm going to use a slightly warmer version of that gray. And I want this to be, I need a little blue. I don't want it no blue. But instead of being a blue gray, I'm going to do kind of a warm gray. There we go. See right there? Okay, this is pretty dark. But I really want to develop some more contrast here. So I'm actually going to make this darker than it is in our reference photo. And I'm just going to very lightly brush over the top of what I have. And I'm being super careful because if I scrub at this too much, if I'm not careful, what's going to happen is I'm going to lift up the color underneath into my top layer, and I could start to get really muddied up, and I don't want to do that because I'm pretty happy with the painting overall. I just feel like this area just needs a little bit more, and add a bit more brown in there. There we go. It's getting it was a little too cool, a little disjointed feeling. So I'm just going to, there we go. Okay. Oh my gosh. I think that made a big difference. I'm much happier with that. Now I could go in and start fussing, and I really want to fuss, but if I do that, I'm going to wreck this. So I'm not going to fuss. The other area that needs a bit more, I think a bit more depth is right here. So I'm going to pull in a nice kind of neutral gray right in between. Maybe a bit warmer. I don't know. Right there. Okay. I'm just going to add a little bit more dry brushing over the top of this. But I'm going to do the whole thing. So I'm just, and my brush is pretty dry. I'm kind of scrubbing at the paper. I have very little water in here. You see, that's just adding some depth and dimension. All right, I'm going to leave it alone. This is the kind of painting that I could continue on. This feels a little, actually, I'm not going to leave it alone yet. This feels like the line between here and here is too harsh. So I'm going to soften it, even though it's not like that in the paint. I'm just going to soften a bit by doing a little dry brushing here. And then after I dry brush, I'm going to add a little, I'm going to touch it with a bit of water to spread it out. There. Okay. Oh, happy with that. All right. Done, done, done. And in the actual photo, it's a little darker here, and there's like a really deep spot here. I'm leaving that out because I think that's going to conflict with my contrast I have here. I want this to be the really high contrast spot, and this to be soft and kind of recede, and this to be soft and, you know, it's in the foreground, but it's soft and not as prominent. This is where your eye is really going to look, but then it's going to help you swoop around. All right. I think we've covered some composition ideas. We've covered color theory in this tutorial, using glazing techniques, doing some dry brushing, really thinking about your value of your picture. So I think we are finished. We should do the tape peel so that you can see what it looks like done. I forget to do that all the time. I think because I know these tutorials have gotten really long, and so I'm thinking about trying to make them as short as possible. But then we don't get the satisfaction of seeing what it looks like at the end. So let's peel off that tape. Now technically, if you want your paper to dry really flat, you would leave the tape on and let it dry under tape, because when it dries all the way while the tape is still on it, it tends to not curl. So this might curl a little bit because I took the tape off early, but that's okay. All right, well, thanks for painting with me. This was for Rigid for World Watercolor Month. And then our next tutorial, well, I'll post today as well, because then we'll be caught up and I'll have be up to date, because today's the 19th and this was the prompt for the 18th. All right, thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.